Motrolix.
Hello and welcome to the 7th episode of the Cadillac Society podcast, where we discuss the latest news, rumors, and anything else surrounding the iconic luxury mark. On today's episode, Cadillac sales figures for the second quarter of 2024. I'm your host G, and joining us as always is Cadillac Society Executive Editor Alex Luft.
Yeah, hey G. So the last time we did this, the Florida Panthers were playing the Edmonton Oilers, and the Panthers won.
That was a Game 7, man.
Game 7.
You
That
pushed
was
it.
a wild night.
You pushed it close, dude.
I did.
You
I
risked
did.
it all for the on that one episode.
I
You
almost
did.
missed it because after we finished, I went. I didn't go to the game, but I actually ended up going to the little local bar and watching the game, and it was great. A lot of good energy. Go Panthers!
Finally, man.
Yeah,
I remember
30 years in the
that.
making.
Dude, I remember catching a game in '96 at the Miami Arena.
Yep.
Now, I know we have a bunch of new listeners. We're up to 20,000 views in June alone.
That's pretty good for our first month.
So, I'd like to take a few moments to remind our new listeners where they can find us. First, CadillacSociety.com/podcast is the place to watch, listen, and subscribe to this show. You can also find us in all the popular podcatchers. Just search for Cadillac Society in Apple Podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Android Podcasts, Amazon Music, Pandora, or iHeartRadio. So, sales figures?
Yeah, we do have some sales figures today. In fact, Cadillac and GM as a whole released the second quarter 2024 sales figures for the U.S. market. And Cadillac specifically was down 1%. Essentially, sales were flat. They weren't that bad, down 1.09%, so 38,455 units in Q2 2024, 38,877 units in Q2 of 2023. So essentially flat, right? It's down 1%. What's a percent here and there? But there are a few interesting things here that are worth noting. So first and foremost, the entire model line was in the red, with one exception, and that exception was the Lyriq, which is quite interesting. So CT4 was down 35%, CT5 was down 28%, the Escalade down 12.9%. The XT4 was down 10.1%, the XT5 was down 13.6%, and the XT6 was down 16.3%. But the Lyriq was up a whopping 441% to 7,294 units. So almost 7,300 units of the Lyriq were delivered during the second quarter of 2024 in the U.S. market,
which is pretty good. In fact, it was the Lyriq's best ever quarterly sales result here.
So essentially, Cadillac's currently only EV on sale, right? Because the Celestiq is not yet on sale. The Celestiq won't even be a volume player. The Optiq not yet on sale. The Vistiq not yet on sale either. The Escalade IQ also not on sale yet either. So essentially, the Lyriq is Cadillac's only EV, and it stole the show for the second quarter, which is, I guess, good news for those who like EVs. Not so good news for those who don't like EVs. I personally don't have an agenda either way. I do like the Lyriq myself, and I'm actually a fan of how it looks, how it drives. The car is pretty good, pretty solid overall.
What do you think the reason is for the jump?
It's a combination of two things that ultimately stem from increased production. So back a year ago, in the year ago quarter, so Q2 of 23, Cadillac just could not build, GM could not build the Lyriq. They could not build enough units. The demand was there. People wanted the Lyriq, but they couldn't build enough. They couldn't build enough as a result of constraints in the supply chain with essentially all the EV related powertrain stuff. So the battery cells, battery pouches for the Ultium system, as well as the Ultium Drive electric motors. They could not build enough to actually ship enough units. Now they have finally figured out a way to build them in mass. And so, building enough obviously means vehicles on the lot. And with vehicles on the lot, people can come in, they can buy one pretty easily, pretty freely, pretty quickly. And that's kind of the system that GM and Cadillac, the modern day Cadillac, that's the system that they're really set up for. they're not really set up for, come in, the customer comes in, they take your order, and some amount of time later, whether it be weeks or months or years, you're going to see your car come in and, be built, then shipped, then arrive at the dealer, and so that the customer can take delivery. GM nowadays isn't really set up for that kind of model. Nowadays, it's all about, build the units, as many units as you can that are in demand, ship them out to dealers, and let the customers come and get them and buy them. So that obviously was on full display for Q2 of 24 for the Lyriq. So really, this is what happens when you build enough cars. This is really the reason. So that's the good news. Lyriq is good, everything else is down. And everything else is down, it's kind of unfortunate. It's unfortunate that the CT4 is down. It's unfortunate that the CT5 is down, because both of those are great products on the proper chassis. They look good, they drive well, they have the right amount of tech. The CT4, I would say, maybe doesn't really have the right amount of tech. The CT5, the refresh model, is now starting to arrive at dealers. So it started to arrive roughly in June, right? So it really didn't have enough sales under its belt to show what the refresh is capable of from a sales standpoint. The XT lineup, however, the lineup of crossovers, that was just, it's a disaster. It's an ongoing disaster. And it's quite sad because, some of these products are good, like the XT4, which got a refresh in 2024, for the 2024 model year, rather. It's a great product, down 10%. The XT5 and the XT6, both of these are long in the tooth. They're old models, outdated models that are just, you just can't really, you can't push old product in this space. You can't do it. The XT5, for its part, it debuted for the 2017 model year, still on sale. So 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. It's been 8 years on the market, and it did get a refresh, but it was a very small refresh. It didn't get any of the things that it really needed. The 33-inch curved display, for example, the refresh didn't bring it, and that was before that screen even existed. And so there's a lot of things like this that are taking place for both the XT5 and the XT6. They're both, obviously, the 5 and the 6, they're related. Mechanically, they both ride on the same platform, just different versions of the same platform, with the XT6 being a bit bigger. But overall, their interiors are, the cockpit is identical between both the XT5 and the XT6, and both need a substantial amount of updates. In the case of the XT5, it's about to get end-of-lifed. So in the North American market, in China, it's going to get an all-new second-generation model, which will bring the 33-inch curved display, which will bring all the new technologies. That model will bring all that. But the results that we see here, down 13.5% for the XT5 to 5,890 units, that's essentially what you get with an old product. And I really do hope that Cadillac is making a lot of money on these, because they're so old. I hope they're just milking that cow.
Is this just a space that has Cadillac just lost interest in general?
This is an interesting topic, and I don't want to get into it on this show, because it's like a whole other episode that we can do about why the XT5 will not get another generation here in the US, in Canada also, in Mexico, essentially the North American market. I think it's worth dedicating a separate episode to this topic. But overall, yeah, they seem to be of the opinion that the Lyriq is the replacement. And if the Lyriq is the replacement for the XT5, then yeah, 7,300, almost 7,300 units is certainly better than 5,890 for the XT5, right? So the Lyriq is now outselling the XT5. So essentially the Lyriq is outselling its internal combustion engined predecessor, which is great news, right? I hope they can build the Lyriq in an even higher capacity. I hope that the Vistic, which will be the EV replacement for the XT6, I hope they can build it in just as high numbers as the XT6, if not higher. And the same thing for the Optic versus the XT4. I hope that they can build the Optic in high quantities. And the same thing goes for the Escalade IQ. I hope they can build it in as high quantities. So if that is all the case, and if this is the demand levels that we see and the sales levels that we will see from Cadillac EVs going forward, that we see this quarter from the Lyriq, then that's great. But my only concern here, and I think this is worth noting, is these Lyriq buyers, these 7,000, nearly 7,300 that they delivered during Q2 of 24, are these customers sustainable? Are these sales levels essentially sustainable? Because what I would hate to see happen is, these 7,300 deliveries in Q2, that's great, right? These are great numbers. It's a great figure. Make no mistake about it. This is a great performance by the Lyriq in Q2. But what if these customers are one and done? Meaning, what if these sales levels are not sustainable because there's only so much interest, a limited amount of interest in a battery electric vehicle like the Lyriq? And I certainly hope that that's not the case. Obviously, GM and Cadillac, they have a lot of information that we don't have, right? They have market studies, they have demand forecasts, they have all these things. And not a single decision gets made in a company like this without a bunch of supporting material, especially decisions as important as the ones that impact the entire product portfolio. But if I were a Cadillac exec, if I were a GM exec nowadays, this is the question that would keep me up at night. Is the EV demand that we see, the healthy EV demand and EV sales that we see for the Lyriq in Q2 of 24, is that demand sustainable? Or are these early adopters that are just, they've come in, they've gotten their vehicle, and there's only so many of them? That is kind of the big question mark right now. But if you look at, Tesla, the Model Y, that's an outstanding success from a sales standpoint. Say what you will about the vehicle. I'm personally not a fan of the Model Y. I'm not a fan of the Model 3. I'm really not a fan of any Tesla nowadays. But the sales performance is that it speaks for itself. Really, it's as simple as that. So I really do hope that the demand and the sales success that the Lyriq has found during Q2 of 24, I really do hope that it stays and it's sustainable.
That's an interesting take. Just looking at how well the Lyriq is doing in the EV market specifically. Just because competitor-wise, who do they have?
The Model Y. That's it. It's the Model Y. And the Model Y sells 5x this.
But the thing is, aesthetically, it's
Oh,
ugly.
Yeah. I mean, from a product standpoint.
No judgment.
No, I agree with you completely. From a product standpoint, from a design standpoint, from an interior quality, material standpoint, driving dynamic standpoint, the ride and handling, the suspension, the comfort, the Lyriq is hands down substantially better. It beats the Model Y in every single category. I mean, if you've ever driven a Model Y and then you go and drive the Lyriq, it's like driving I don't know what to equate it to, but it's like the Model Y is like a skateboard. Okay, it's got no suspension. The suspension's terrible. It's like riding on rocks. And I don't want to sound crass, but the Model Y looks so bad. It just looks so bad. It's an egg. It's an egg. It's got no design flair about it whatsoever. It's just this amorphous looking thing. All right, it's like a melted poop. That's it. Like aliens came down. Something happened, and it melted, and now it's turned into alien shit. Melted alien shit. Okay, that's where I'm going to leave it. The same thing goes for the entire user experience inside the Tesla. Okay, you've got this big screen here. In the case of the Tesla, bigger is not better. It's worse because every single feature, including the climate controls and the HVAC, everything you do on the screen, there's no hard buttons, there's no physical buttons. It's bad. The materials are bad. The build quality was bad initially. It's gotten a bit better now. They've kind of figured some stuff out from a quality standpoint. Fine, great for Tesla. But from a product standpoint, apples to apples, the Lyriq just blows the Model Y out of the water. And it drives better. It's softer. It's not like you're riding like beside a skateboard, like you're, over every highway junction. You're feeling it in your teeth, and your teeth are bouncing together, and it's just not a good product. So I think that now that GM and Cadillac can finally build the Lyriq in high enough numbers, and I really do hope that they can build it in even higher numbers, I think that you will now see demand and the sales figures rise up at the expense of the Model Y. I really do hope so, because if products like the Model Y sell in as high a quantities in as high quantity as they do, I don't even want to be into cars anymore. Like I would literally just no longer like cars, because now it's like a refrigerator with wheels, or a cell phone with wheels, whatever however you want to call it. The Lyriq has style, it's got flair, it's got, I mean, look at the interior. It's beautiful, gorgeous. Meanwhile, the Model Y, I mean, just go inside of one of those things. Here's to hoping that, like I said, these numbers are, that these numbers keep climbing, because, the Model Y outsells this. I don't have the latest figures, and Tesla is typically very bad about reporting their sales numbers on a per model basis. They usually don't break that out the way that Cadillac does. But this is very good for the Lyriq. And again, you don't have to be. I know that this is a very polarizing topic. You don't have to be an EV fan. You don't have to be an EV hater. You don't have to be either one of those things, right? You just need to look at the product that Cadillac has made in the EV space, which is the Lyriq. There is a opportunity, right? There is an opportunity for a product in this space, in this price range, this kind of body style, right? It's a crossover. It's priced between $60,000 to $70,000. That's the space. It actually goes even higher than 70, obviously, right? And you can, if you really spec it out, in Sport 3 and Luxury 3 trim levels, you can get it up to $80K. But the point is that there is a space there, and Cadillac is going after that space with the Lyriq. So this is not about someone being, an EV fanboy or not. This is just about business. And at the end of the day, the Lyriq is the vehicle that deserves to win, more so than the Model Y, in my opinion.
Agreed, 100% agreed on that one.
Another thing that I wanted to bring up is a comparison of Cadillac sales overall to those of BMW. So during the same quarter, so second quarter of 24, this is apples to apples, Cadillac delivered 38,455 vehicles in the US, right? BMW, 91,238. So that's a substantial difference. That is, if we round it up, 40K versus 90K. That's a 50,000 and change unit difference between Cadillac and BMW in favor of BMW. Unfortunately, not in favor of Cadillac. And so, you start comparing these line by line. And we have a report about this very thing at CadillacSociety.com. I'll include it in the show notes. But it essentially compares on a model line standpoint, Cadillac versus BMW. So you look at, for instance, CT4, right? CT4 sold 1,768 units. The 2 Series sold 2,898, right? Okay, let's look at the CT5. The CT5 sold 3,841 units versus 16,813 for the 3 and the 4 Series. And I combined the 3 and the 4 Series because the CT5 technically competes against the 3 Series, but the 4 Series now has a Grand Coupe, which is also a 4-door D-segment vehicle that is in this space, and now the 4 Series is available as the i4, so that's electric. So it's not exactly apples to apples, but the point is that there's a lot more BMWs in the D space, in the D segment luxury space, that were sold during the same time frame compared to the CT5. XT4 versus X1 and X2, so it's actually performing quite well. 5,154 units for the XT4, 6,503 combined units for the X1 and X2. XT5, this is where BMW wins. So XT5, 5,890 units, 20,401 units for the X3 and the X4 combined. So, it's outselling it substantially, right? 4x. XT6 versus the X5 and the X6. So XT6 moved 4,439 units versus 20,876 units for the X5 and the X6. The Lyriq. The Lyriq moved 7,294 units. The iX moved 3,645 units. So in the EV space, Cadillac has the upper hand. But everything else, right? Everything else BMW is dominating. And then there's the Escalade. So the Escalade sold 10,069 units. This is Escalade and Escalade ESV combined. Versus the X7, 7,394 units for the X7. So Cadillac is essentially dominating when it comes to electric crossovers, and it is winning, I wouldn't say dominating anymore, when it comes to full-size F-segment SUVs. But everything else, literally everything else, C-segment sedan, D-segment sedan, C-segment internal combustion engine crossover, D-segment internal combustion engine crossover, E-segment internal combustion engine crossovers. That's the XT4, XT5, XT6. That space versus the BMWs, BMW wins. Sometimes by a little bit in case of the XT4 versus the X1 and X2. But in the case of the XT5 and the XT6, the X3, X4, X5, X6 dominate the Cadillac offerings. And we can see that. We can see why, right? XT5, XT6 are old, as I mentioned earlier. I don't want to, sound like a broken record, but they're old products. The X3 and X4 are also old products, and there's a new generation on the way that we actually covered at CadillacSociety.com recently. But nevertheless, currently they're selling old, the outgoing generation X3 and X4, still managing to sell, 3 to 4x what Cadillac is selling in that space. So that's quite interesting, and I think that when you take away the Lyriq and when you take away the Escalade, Cadillac is losing. That's kind of the scary part.
Now, the BMW models that I just mentioned, these account for 78,000 of the total 91,000 and change that BMW sold in Q2 of 24. The remaining 13K, I actually waited until the end to discuss these, and that's because these are the vehicle segments where Cadillac does not compete today. So things like the 5 Series, 7 and 8 Series, the Z4, Cadillac has no rival to these models in the US market. So as you can see, not only is Cadillac having trouble competing in the segments that it currently competes in, when it comes to competing and going up against BMW in those segments, but it also doesn't even compete in all of the luxury vehicle segments. So, even I wouldn't say most of them. It competes in a select few that are the biggest ones, but it doesn't compete in all of them. So things like mid-size sedans, full-size sedans, full-size coupes, roadsters, Cadillac simply has nothing to offer there.
So how do you fix it? The XT6 needs to be refreshed. The CT4 needs to be refreshed. The next-gen XT5 needs to come to the US. The CT6 needs to come to the US. It's only currently now in China. The next-gen XT5, also a Chinese exclusive. There needs to be a Cadillac Coupe, as we discussed on the prior episode. There has to be at least one Cadillac Coupe in the lineup. Otherwise, you're not a serious player in the luxury space. If you lack the epitome of a luxury vehicle, which is a personal coupe, how can you, go out there and say that you're serious about being in this business? So there's that. And beyond that, Cadillac also needs to start thinking about, or really needs to start doing coupe versions of its traditional crossovers. So the XT4, XT5, XT6, all of these need coupe variants. On the BMW side, so like the X2, X4, X6, they have 3, and they make a ton of money. They're not that, they don't sell in that high a volume, but they make a ton of money because all they do is they take the one number lower vehicle. So in the case of the X2, they take the X1. It's the same chassis, same platform, same vehicle overall, same powertrain. All the hard work is already done. All they do is they put a different body on it, and they sell it for several $1,000s more. And so the volume isn't that high, but the profit margin per unit is substantial. it's like, 2x that, or 3x sometimes that of a regular model. So that's the strategy for the X2 versus the X1, X4 versus the X3, X6 versus the X5, and now BMW also has the XM, which is essentially an X7 with a different body and a different powertrain as well. So call these things whatever you want, crossover coupes. I know there's some debate about, the naming, but forget about the naming for a second. Just look at the opportunity. We can call them low roofline variants. Look at the opportunity there. And then you might ask, well, why are we looking at only at BMW? Well, first, because BMW is one of the two leaders in this space, the other being Mercedes. But Mercedes is, it's always like a week late in reporting sales figures. And then they can do that because they're Mercedes,
Pinkies up, man. Pinkies up.
Mercedes, $1 billion.
$100 billion. That's it?
That's it. That's all I need. It's $100 billion. Now, one final note. How does all of this potentially translate into dollars, right? That's kind of the big question, right? Yeah, Cadillac sold 38,455 units during Q2 of 24. Yes, it was down 1%. But how does that ultimately translate to dollars and cents? And that's kind of the big question, right? Because it's a mystery. They don't report on this stuff. They don't break the stuff out in their quarterly earnings. They just say, well, we made this much in this market, like GM North America, that's that much. But no one really knows how much did Cadillac make versus, say, Buick versus, say, GMC versus, say, Chevy, right? Well, we can do some crude math to find out. So the average transaction price of a new Cadillac during May was $73,000. So $73,076 is the actual figure. Now we take $73,076, we multiply it by the amount of vehicles sold during Q2 of 24, and we get $2.8 billion.
It's a little heavy.
$2.8 billion.
Not too bad.
Not too bad.
But, it takes a lot of money to make money at their level.
It does. It really does. So that's revenue, right? That's quarterly revenue. So $2.8 billion. It's not that much. It's not that much. Because when you have GM as a whole making $43 billion in revenue, $43 billion during the prior quarter, this is Q1 of 24, when you start factoring in and breaking this stuff down into regions, so GM North America during Q1 of 24, this is last quarter, they made $36.1 billion. I forgot to do the pinky. $36.1 billion in revenue. Now, according to the figures here, right, Cadillac made just shy of $3 billion, $2.8 billion in revenue. So if we compare Q2 of 24 Cadillac sales, and we do our whole formula and calculation, and we assume we're correct, so $2.8 billion is what Cadillac made in revenue during Q2 of 24 versus $36.1 billion that GM made as a whole in Q1 of 24 in revenue. That means that Cadillac is really only a small portion of the GM pie in North America, because we are looking at, U.S. sales. So you could factor in, since North America also includes, right, Canada, Mexico, you can factor in those markets. I think those markets would actually help Cadillac to reach, instead of $2.8 billion, it would probably help it reach somewhere in the threes, right? $3.3 billion. They're not substantial markets from a sales volume standpoint. So that I think is an interesting, observation, is that you have 3.3 given, somewhere in the $3 billion range that Cadillac nets in revenue per quarter. At least that's what they will net in Q2 of 24. Whereas GM as a whole makes a whole lot more money. And that probably means that money is being made by Chevy and GMC, not by Cadillac and, Buick, which is the other GM brand in North America. So, interesting. It's an interesting, data point, I would say. But overall, Cadillac needs to step it up. There's a lot of ground to cover. They're getting, especially when you compare them to BMW. Mercedes sells roughly what BMW sells as well. So Mercedes also outsells Cadillac. Audi also outsells Cadillac. So it's time for Cadillac to step it up. Now, this might have been a down quarter. This might have been, not a great quarter for them, and but they're not going to reach, even with a great quarter in the near-term future, they're not going to reach, BMW's levels of sales, where they're selling 91,000 units and change during the same quarter. It will be tough for Cadillac to make that ground up with its current model lineup. So something needs to change substantially for Cadillac to not only catch up to the likes of BMW and Mercedes, but also then to surpass them. And I have to wonder what that is. I have to wonder what the strategy is, because there was a point in time in the past where Cadillac had BMW's levels of sales, Mercedes levels of sales, and everyone else was sitting there at the bottom looking up at Cadillac saying, hey, wow, it would be nice to have that volume. But now it's flipped. So I really do hope that something changes. And this would have to be a tectonic shift. This would be a Big Bang style of shift. And I now that I think about it, I have to wonder, is Cadillac hoping for this kind of a Big Bang moment with its upcoming onslaught of EVs? You'll have the Optic, you'll have the Lyriq. The Lyriq is doing great, as we saw. That's the one segment that Cadillac is dominating BMW in, is the electric vehicle space. The Optic, should we expect similar results? Vistic, Escalade IQ, so on and so forth. There is going to be a Cadillac electric sedan that's not the Celestiq. So hopefully this upcoming portfolio of Cadillac electric vehicles really does shift the game in Cadillac's favor. But as you can see, there's a lot of ground to cover here.
Fantastic. That's the Q2 numbers.
Yeah.
Shed some light on it. See more or less where the future could be. Lyriq is looking very positive. I've seen them everywhere. I've been driving quite a bit. I've been on the road a lot this last week, and they're very pleasant to look at. I can see why they're selling so well. I'm seeing them everywhere.
Yeah.
So before we finish, do you have any final thoughts this week?
Yes. Start competing better, Cadillac. There's always the possibility when you compete that you're going to lose. Don't compete. Win.
And
Dominate. Yes. Those are my final thoughts.
Beautiful. Alrighty. Thank you all for joining us on the 7th episode of the Cadillac Society podcast. You can find this show at cadillacsociety.com/podcast and on the Metrolix Network YouTube channel. Please remember to hit that like button and give us a follow to stay up to date on the latest Cadillac news. We're also on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, Android Podcasts, Amazon Music, Pandora, or iHeartRadio. So be sure to subscribe and leave a review. If you would like us to discuss something specific, you can now suggest a topic by going to cadillacsociety.com/podcast. Stay tuned for our 8th episode next week about the Cadillac CT6. In the meantime, be sure to visit cadillacsociety.com for the latest news and forums.
Motrolix.
Cadillac Society is an independent enthusiast website and podcast and is not affiliated with, sponsored by, or otherwise associated with Cadillac or General Motors.